Hello everybody, Mark here from Present Day Production. Hope you're staying safe and keeping healthy. Now, a lot of people have asked us if we can do a studio tour. At the moment, I'm working from home in this little setup I cobbled together last week. If you want to see how I did that and missed that video, then links at the top of the screen now. We're in lockdown at the moment due to the coronavirus outbreak, so I don't really want to go to the studio just to kind of do a tour as it is at the moment. But a couple of years ago I did do a little video tour and a video on how we built the studio, how we took care of the acoustics, how we did the soundproofing and all that kind of stuff for one of the communities of sort of producers and studio owners that I'm part of, and that's never been made available to the public. So I thought, well, that really is a studio tour, and it shows some of the construction and how we went about, first off kind of dismissing all the people that told us we'd never do it, and then going, right, okay, we've got no money, we need to build a studio, how are we going to do it, and the sort of DIY approach we took. So I thought I'd make that available for you. The studio's a little bit different now. We've still got the same live room, we've still got the control room, but we've also got an additional 2 rooms, one of which we have Tom Evans, who works in the film industry doing trailer music and stuff like that. He's in one of our rooms, and the other room is occupied by Joel Goodman, who's a piano teacher and sort of musical theatre show writer slash producer in the other room. So it's changed a little bit now. I can't go in now and give you a tour of the whole place, but once the lockdown restrictions have been lifted, assuming we're still open, which hopefully we will be, then I will give you a tour of the whole thing and introduce you to everybody, and you can see kind of how the premises is now. But this is a video we did back in 2016. Most of it's still relevant. Obviously all the physics, all the acoustics and things are still relevant. So hope you enjoy that. If you've got any questions, then please let us know in the comments, and don't forget, please like the video, please subscribe, and please ding the little bell. We'll speak to you all soon. Enjoy the video. Hello everybody. So I thought I'd just elaborate a little bit on what I was talking about with Brian the other day on the interview, and just show you a little bit around the studio and explain a bit about what we've done, how we built it, what we've done with the acoustics on it. So I mentioned James quite a lot. This is James here, who's my business partner and helped build the studio. He's been with me since 2014, something like that, which is way too long. But there we go. He's really good. It's nice to have a young person on board for EDM mainly, which is good. So yeah, so let's have a little talk about how we built the place. We had an existing studio about 4 miles down the road, which we had to close down because the whole site was being developed for housing. So the hunt was on for a new unit. We found this one here in Epping, which is about half an hour outside of London. It's 5 minutes from the tube station, so you can get a tube train into central London in about half an hour, which is great. And it gave us a blank canvas to decide how we wanted the rooms, how many rooms we wanted, and how to build it. That sounds very expensive, but it needn't be. So one of the reasons why we're doing this video is to show you guys that you don't have to spend thousands and thousands of pounds or dollars on either converting an existing room into somewhere that sounds great or into building something from scratch. We were advised not to do it by every professional we spoke to. So we got in contact when we knew that we were going to be building this place. We got in contact with various acousticians with our budget, which around the time was about £15,000, and all of them said, don't do it, you'll never do it, go and work in a supermarket or something like that. For the money you've got, you won't even get the floor done. And we were like, right, okay, that's rubbish, we can do it. So I was fortunate enough to meet a gentleman by the name of Adrian Kerridge, who is involved with Recording Architecture, who are a company who have built countless first-class studios around the world. And he introduced me to this book and sold me this very copy, which is a really big, chunky, heavy book. If you like big, chunky, heavy books, this is the one. This is not the sort of book you want to read while you're having a poo, because it will cut off circulation to your legs. And it's £135, so it seems quite expensive. Also available as digital download, of course, but it's worth every penny, and it really saved us a fortune. It's a fantastic book. You probably can't see it very well on the camera there, but it tells you everything. Not only are there fantastic photos of amazing studios all around the world, but it shows you how to build a wall, how to build a door, where to put the door closer, how many hinges to put it on it, and where. It's absolutely fantastic. It covers sound isolation, sound absorption, and that kind of taught us everything that we needed to know in order to build the studio ourselves, which we've done. We've had, where we've needed to get professionals in for legal reasons, we have, so air conditioning engineers and things like that, but the actual build we've done almost entirely ourselves. So it's been an uphill struggle. It took 6 months to build the first room, including research and gathering materials and things like that. A lot of the materials we managed to recycle from the previous studio, so that saved us a lot of money in wood. But there's two things you need to think about when you're building a studio or converting an existing room into a studio, and the first thing is sound isolation or soundproofing, and then the second thing is sound treatment and acoustic absorption, diffusion, etc. Because once you've built a soundproof room, it will sound like crap, because it keeps all the sound in the room, so you're going to get sound bouncing around everywhere and it'll sound awful. So you need to incorporate absorption, particularly to stop that sound bouncing around and ruining your recordings. The key thing is this stuff, the old acoustic foam. It's shit. There's no other word for it. It was originally intended for home cinema people, and it doesn't even really work for that. Yes, it absorbs stuff. You can hear there, yeah, it absorbs some sound, but it only absorbs the really high frequencies, unless you double or quadruple or have this a foot wide, in which case it'll then work down to maybe the mid-range if you're lucky, but basically it makes your room sound boxy and horrible. So that's great if you're posting something you've sold on eBay. Brilliant. Other than that, it's best to be avoided at all costs, and you can make your own acoustic panels and your own acoustic treatment that will be far more effective and far cheaper as well. But the first thing was sound isolation. We've got neighbours nearby. There's a house just behind the unit. We've got other units next door to us. Fortunately, the guy next door runs a PA company, so isn't too worried about noise. But even so, we wanted it's just as important for us when we're recording to keep external sounds out. There's a car dealership next door, there's window manufacturers over the road, so we need to keep external noise out as well as keeping any noise we generate in. And if the building's reasonably soundproofed, we can work till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning if we want to, and not have any complaints from the neighbours. So let's talk a little bit about soundproofing, which is the hardest part and the most expensive part to get right. Sound is very good at escaping from spaces, and there are 3 key things that you need to be aware of if you're trying to soundproof a room. One is mass, so the mass of the walls, the mass of the doors, the mass of the windows. The second thing is isolation. If you can isolate what you're building from the existing structure, then you're going to have a far more effective level of soundproofing when you get to the outside world. And the third thing is damping. So if the walls incorporate an element of damping, then they actually turn the sound energy into another form of energy. In our case, it's very tiny amounts of heat. So to achieve isolation, we built the floors floating off the main concrete slab. In big, huge, expensive, multi-million-pound studios, they'll actually form a huge concrete slab for each room of the studio, which will be mounted on specially designed springs. Very, very expensive. You're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds just for one room to do that. We only had hundreds of pounds. So our stud work floats on isolated rubber, kind of like pucks, and then that's then filled with sand, dried sand. Must be dried sand, otherwise you can end up with rot in the floor, which you don't want. And then a surface on top of that, which was layers of MDF plasterboard, and then I think we used sterling board on top of that. And then the actual walls of each room are built on top of that floating slab. So what then happens is, when you've got a drummer in the room who's pounding a bass drum, the energy from the pounding the bass drum doesn't go through the floor and then straight into the concrete subfloor below, because that will then get out into the outside world. It's largely stopped before it hits the concrete. So that means we can sit in the control room and you can barely hear a kick drum in the live room, which is next door. The walls, if we go back to the mass thing, the walls of the live room consist of a sandwich of materials, again as outlined in the RA book. We start off with a layer of MDF, so thick 18mm or 3/4 inch MDF, and then there's 2 layers of plasterboard, in between which there's a membrane damping layer, and then that's repeated. So you've got MDF, plasterboard, membrane, plasterboard, MDF, plasterboard, membrane, plasterboard. So the whole thing forms a sandwich which is about that thick and is as good as concrete block, in fact better than concrete block, for isolating sound. We couldn't build the rooms out of concrete block because building regulations in the UK stipulate that they need to be tied into the outside structure of the building using wall ties, and if you use wall ties, then your isolation's gone. You're coupling the inside of the building to the outside of the building, and that's no good. So we had to consult with building regulations and see what we could and couldn't do, and the sandwich layer was the way to go. So once you've done that and you've built your room, the tricky thing to get good soundproofing with are always doors and windows. So windows, we didn't have one. We were going to have a window from the live room to the control room, as is traditional, but in the end we opted to build the control room the other way round for various practical purposes, and that's the kind of thing you can do easily with a wireless CCTV camera these days, and saves a huge ball ache with putting large panes of glass in, and then an air gap, and then another pane of glass, and it's a weak link, it's a pain to build. You have to have steel lintels above to support the weight of the wall above it. So we just basically built a solid room, but obviously you need a door. Every room needs a door, otherwise you can't get into it and you can't get out of it. So we looked at various options for studio doors, and they're all massively expensive, and then read the book again, and the book says make the door out of the same thing you made the walls out of, which makes perfect sense, because then your door is as good as the wall in terms of isolation. So that fitted with good seals and a good door closer that holds it firmly shut. Worked really well. There's a tiny little bit of sound leakage around the door, but not enough to, only in the very top end, not enough to really make any difference. So that's how we built the room, the basic shell of the room. So in terms of actual acoustic treatment, once we'd built the outside structure of the room, we then had a really dense wall, which was fantastic for keeping sound in and keeping sound out. But the room sounded like shit. It will do, because you've got all the sound that's generated in the room stays in the room and bounces around everywhere. So you then need to look at acoustic treatment, which is the second phase of the attack. The walls in here are 100% treated. So from floor to ceiling, wherever you look, there's acoustic treatment. There's not a single bit of plasterboard or any kind of traditional wall material. There's nowhere to hang a clock, there's nowhere to put any pictures up. It's all acoustic treatment, and it's all been DIY acoustic treatment as well. The Sea of Holes MDF panels are diffusers, that's the white panels. Details for construction of those are all in the RA book. Those we made ourselves. We drilled all the holes out, cut all the holes ourselves, routed out the chamfered edges and sanded them all by hand, and then primed them, and then gave them a satin coat over the top. To make all those, I think, took about 2 weeks, and didn't cost anywhere near as much as standard acoustic panels would, because all we had to do was pay for the MDF and then put in some time. Each panel is a 8x4 sheet of MDF cut in half lengthways, so we get 2 panels per sheet. So the whole room cost a couple of £100 to do, including the paint. And then the red panels in between those, they are absorbers, so they absorb sound, and it's basically a good thick layer of standard rock wool insulation. The denser and thicker you can do it, the better. The lower the frequency that will be absorbed it'll go down to. And there's literally slabs of rock wool just placed in the wall, and then they're covered with the red fabric panels, which stop any stray fibres getting out. And obviously if you walk into a room and it's just bare rock wool on the walls, it doesn't look particularly nice. So the red and white we think works quite well. It's quite vibey, and along with the LED lights that we've got in the ceiling, again, which is 100% acoustic treatment. The only exception to that is where the downlighters are. That's just standard plasterboard, so that's the only bit of plasterboard you'll see in the room. But the rest of it, there's a large bass trap in the middle, which also incorporates some lighting as well. And there's absorption around the edges, because bass energy likes to collect in the corners, and that's not just wall corners, but floor to wall corners and wall to ceiling corners as well. So the corners act as bass traps, and the far end walls act as bass traps as well. So if you look at those, they're different to the side walls. There's no diffusion on the end walls, that's all absorption, and there are bass traps tuned down to about 80 or 100 hertz, which suck out all the nasty energy that you don't want. The room is, due to practical purposes, the room is a rectangle. Really, rectangles or squares should be avoided. If you can make the walls non-parallel by at least around 10 to 15%, that will help you get rid of any room modes that may accumulate. But because of the width of our empty unit, that just wasn't practical to do that. It would have wasted too much space, and we'd have had a room that was very narrow one end and barely wide enough the other. So we chose to go for a rectangular shape, and then really went to town on the acoustics treatment. The upshot of that is that the room is generally very neutral and very flat. There's a slight dip in the sort of bass response of the room if you stand directly in the middle of it. There's a dip at about 100 hertz, hence putting the 80 to 100 tuned bass traps in. But effectively that means that if you record a bass cabinet in the middle of the room, then you might get a fairly uneven response through a microphone. So don't put it in the middle of the room, put it in a corner or at the edge or at one end. The same with the drum kit. Make sure the kick drum's not in the middle of the room, make sure it's 2/3 of the way down, or just somewhere that's not in the middle of the room. So that's fairly easy to get round. So that's the live room. Let's have a look in the control room, and we'll show you some of the stuff that we've done in there. So this is the control room. It's actually slightly bigger than the live room. I hate small control rooms, and when I first started going to commercial studios back in the late 80s, I was shocked at how big some of the control rooms were, and also shocked at how far away from the back wall the mixing desk was. You could walk round it and almost drive round the back of it if you wanted to. And again, that's for various acoustic reasons. I just assumed that mixing desks were pushed up against the wall, but largely they're not. So this is a fairly typical control room design. It's a live end, dead end design. So we've got a dead end, lots of acoustic treatment on the front wall to stop anything reflecting back at us from the direction the sound is coming in from the monitors, but a liver end on the back wall. So we've got some very DIY sound diffusers on the back wall, which were free. They're actually part of the fabric of the building we moved into. When we moved into this building, it was basically a tin shed, and the soundproofing was literally what you'd expect from a biscuit tin. If you put a bee in a biscuit tin and close the lid, you're still going to hear it, and we just had a larger version of that. So we had to take the internal cladding off the walls and then fill that with layers of plasterboard and the sound dampening material, as mentioned before, in order to give us a second layer of isolation. So there's an air gap between the control room and the outside of the building. There's an air gap between the live room and the outside of the building. It's room within a room construction. So the diffusion on the back wall is literally those panels recycled, just turned on their sides and fixed onto the wall. And the reason you really want a bit of diffusion in a control room is because you tend to talk a lot. You have a lot of conversations in the control room, and if it's too dead, it does you in. It does your ears in after a while. You can get cabin fever, and it just kind of sounds like you're in a very claustrophobic space. So having a large room gets around that, and having the diffusion on the back wall gets around that as well. It just makes talking easier, and it's just a more pleasant environment to work in. Again, this was all DIY. So Brian mentioned the starry ceiling, which he hadn't seen in the photos. We looked into, there's a lot of home cinema companies that do a fibre optic star ceiling if you've got £20,000 to spend on a ceiling, which we haven't. So we did it for about 20,000 pence. No, nowhere near. We did it for about 80 quid. We just drilled some holes in the ceiling and then poked Christmas lights through. Hey presto, star ceiling. What more could you want? We can even vary the rate of flash and all those things you can do with Christmas lights, we can do with our ceiling. And at Christmas time, we just drape tinsel on the ceiling, and there you go, ready-made tree. Fantastic. So once we'd built the fabric of the room, so the outer shell, it was then time for acoustic treatment on the inside again. So we've already talked about the absorption and diffusion. We've got diffusion on the back wall, absorption everywhere else. In terms of bass traps, you can see on the side walls we've got floor to ceiling bass traps that are about, on the surface, about 2 feet thick, but they're actually thicker than that because the acoustic treatment goes back probably another 18 inches behind that. So there's huge bass traps in the middle of the room that suck out any really low frequencies that we get from the monitors and stop them bouncing back into our ears or cancelling out. Again, the middle of the room is best avoided, although this room, we learning from the live room, this room we did so well, which was more by luck than judgment, I have to admit. Wherever you walk around the room, you don't really hear that much of a difference in bass energy, apart from in the very corners, which is good, because if you want bass to collect anywhere, then it wants to be in the very rear corners of your room, and in the rear corner where the floor meets the wall and where the wall meets the ceiling. And that is a great place to put a sofa, because then a sofa acts as a bass trap. So here we've got you can see there's a back step on the back wall, and that step again acts as a tuned bass absorber, so the whole step has a resonant frequency which is really low. It's sort of 60-80 hertz, something like that, and that helps as that moves. It helps soak up that bass energy, and there's loads of insulation stuffed under that. That's sitting on the main subfloor, which is filled with a good 6 inches of dried sand, so that the whole floor kind of acts as a big bass trap. And then you've got the sofas on top of that, which also absorb extra low energy, and then generally there's a band sitting on that as well, and the musicians also act as bass traps. One of the key things when you are building a control room, if you want to absorb extra super low bass in the corners, is obviously that you have a 4-foot Yeti. That's quite essential, really, and I don't think I'd work in a studio without a Yeti anymore, because it makes such a big difference to the sound of the room. So that's him over there absorbing the bass. So once we'd done that, the room was sounding great, so then it was time to fill it up with equipment. And the key thing for us, or the key thing for me, is I've worked in a lot of big studios, and they have very expensive monitoring systems. If you're looking at something by companies such as ATC, they're super accurate, fantastic monitors that you can hear every little detail in the music. If there's a problem in the bass end at 20 hertz, one of the full range ATC systems will let you know it. If you do a crap mix, they'll let you know it straight away. If you do a good mix, then wow, all of a sudden it's like, yeah, this is a really good mix, it's as good as I can get it. And because I've been used to working with systems like that, I didn't want to put NS10s in our control room, or any kind of sort of prosumer monitor speaker, because they're just not accurate enough for what I'm used to working with. So built into the wall, we were very, very lucky to get in contact with a guy who used to work at DJM Studios, Dick Jones Music, in Oxford Street, which was a very well-known studio in the 1980s. And one of the engineers there was a gentleman by the name of Roger Quested, who went on to form the Quested Studio Monitor Company. And he built a pair of monitors for their control room because what they had in there was crap. And they couldn't hear what they were recording properly, and big studio control room monitors back in the 70s and early 80s were basically glorified PA systems. They normally consisted of a horn and a bass driver, and if you were lucky there'd be a mid-range driver in there as well. And Roger, they were tiring to listen to for long periods of time. Near-field monitors hadn't really come in and weren't as widely available as they are today. So he decided it would be a good idea, as it was such a fantastic studio and they were working with clients like Elton John and people like that, that he'd design a fantastic pair of monitor speakers for that control room. So the first ever pair of Quested monitors were installed in DJM Studios, and now we've got them. Because when DJM closed, the gentleman who we bought them from took them with him, and then installed them in his studio over in Berkshire somewhere. And then when he closed his studio down last year, said, you know, you can have them, they've got to come out of the wall, but you can have them with amps and ATC crossover and everything. So we managed to get these two monitors at a bargain price, and they are fantastic. Our mixes have been so much better since we've been working on these than what we had before. Before we had a pair of Tannoy dual concentric speakers, which were great, really good, highly recommend those. But these just nail it. So they're basically Roger Quested's first ever pair of speakers. JBL bass drivers in the bottom for the techie people among you. They've got the ATC 75mm Superdome mid-range unit that ATC are world famous for, and I forget the make of the tweeters, but they're Audax. But they basically, all three drivers work as a cohesive unit. You can't really hear any kind of crossover discrepancies with them. There's no crossover distortion because it's an active system. And these are coupled with ATC twin 15-inch subs, which were custom designed for a studio in Northampton, which again I got for virtually nothing, but had to go and take them out of the wall, which was a bit of a nightmare job, but we got them out of the studio in Northampton, and then here they are. So we've got a large amount of woofer in the wall, which really tells us what's going on in the bass end, or if there's hum. If we get, someone sends in some tracks and there's a huge hum on the recording, bang, you can just hear it straight away. So that's our window into the musical world. Just a quick thing about gear. I've done the whole analog thing. I've done tape, I've done Neve, I've done SSL, I've done Trident, I've done everything. The most important thing when you're mixing is monitors and the room that you're mixing in. Nothing else matters. If you're using a £3,000 Neve mic preamp and you're mixing and monitoring in a room where you can't really hear what's going on, then you've wasted £3,000 on a preamp. You might as well use the preamp that's in your interface and spend £3,000 on a better set of monitors. That's far more sort of good use of your cash than investing in boutique mic preamps and stuff like that. With that goes with our whole budget ethos thing. So we've built the studio on a budget. We've saved money where we can and spent money where it matters. And there's several key points in the recording chain that you would be better spending a lot of money on than not. And monitoring is one of them.